Hey, this is Aaron Chambers. Welcome to episode 26 of Enjoy the Journey with Aaron Chambers. I guess I'm supposed to tell you about myself a little bit. I was listening to how great podcasts work, and I'm an author of 7 books, a minister at Journey Christian Church in Greeley, Colorado. I'm a life coach, marriage coach. I'm a co-founder of a network of leaders called the Connect Leadership Network. I do all kinds of stuff. And one of the things I do is I meet interesting people. And so in my podcast, I talk to interesting people and they're interested in you because I find it fascinating to get to know people. And one of those fascinating people I've got to know over the years is a lady named Jenn Johnson. And she's a very talented lady. She's the Chief Communications Officer at Johnson University in Knoxville, Tennessee. She's an author. She has, before coming to Johnson, she had her own business, and it's called Gen Right, where she helped businesses and industries create books, curriculum, videos, websites, marketing campaigns. Sorry, I know her just not all the details of her amazing life. She says she spent her 30s blogging about faith, doubt, the church, and idiosyncrasies of Christian culture. Compile those into her book, Gen Right, that came out in 2018. I was blessed to write the forward to that. She is currently a wife, stepmom. We're going to talk about that coming up in this conversation. And board member for Orchard Group and the Christian Missionary Fellowship. She's a graduate student and American Airlines gold member, a reluctant dog owner, and a big fan of caffeine, my friend. So this conversation is fun. Talk about life. So talk about growing up in a Christian home. Talk about all kinds of things, including at the end we talk about what's it like to be a step parent, what the church needs to work on when it comes to step parents. So this is a really fun conversation. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up and share it and subscribe to my channel. That'd be so awesome. So, hey, I hope you enjoy this conversation I have with Jenn Johnson, and I hope you enjoy the journey.
All right. Hey, Aaron Chambers here. Hi guys. I am so excited for you to hear from this amazing person, Jenn Johnson. I've had the privilege of knowing her for a really long time. And so Jenn, thank you so much for being on my podcast.
This is fun. This is a first for me.
Is this the first time you've been on a podcast?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Listen, you are one of the most interesting people in my life. And you're one of those people, Jenn, when we get together, it's like we kind of pick up where we left off. Yeah. And you, I like how you think. You're a good writer, a good communicator. So I'm so pumped. I'm the first. Thank you. That's cool. So we met, I was getting ready for this. I was thinking about when we met. I think it was with, as editors, contributing editors for the Christian Standard.
Which would have been probably 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. Maybe even earlier.
That was fun. For those of you who don't know, what, Jenn?
I'm sorry. See, I'm new to podcasting, so I don't know, you have to wait and let the other person talk. It was one of the highlights for me of probably the last 20 years. And I'm so grateful that it lasted as long as it did, because it was so life-giving and it was just such a personal blessing.
Yeah, here's the thing that we experienced. We were part of a think tank with some very, very interesting people, really good thinkers, really good people, obviously. And we helped our job was to help direct the magazine, from an outsider's reader's point of view, and make sure that it was relevant. But it ended up being an amazing, we'd get together for a few days each year and have these amazing conversations. And you're right, it was one of the highlights of that season of my life. And so I want to jump into some stuff with you. So you grew up in a Christian home, right? And it's okay. I grew up in a Christian home, but I want to hear from your perspective. What are some of the things that people completely misunderstand about growing up in a Christian home?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to maybe define terms a little bit, because I think there's the stereotype is it's all about rules and you have to go to church 15 times a week and you're not allowed to have any fun. And that's probably true for some families, which is probably why it's a stereotype. But I think I don't know, I never got to meet your dad, and I've never met your mom. but I'm guessing your experience was a lot like mine, where, yeah, there were certain boundaries and there were definitely some things that were like taught. But it was less about legalism and more about trying to understand who Jesus was. And like all families, we did that imperfectly. But so we were at church a lot, but that was where some of my best friends were. And that's where I had some of the most fun. And it doesn't mean I always was excited about, Sunday night youth choir or whatever it was. But the Christian family was just, it was so much of who we are. It wasn't just an adjective that was applied to us. And I think sometimes the stereotype comes when it's like the family's not really trying to chase after who Jesus is or learn what that means for them as individuals. Certainly, there's a lot of families where the parents haven't been discipled to be discipling their children, right? Mm-hmm. And fortunately, I had an experience where that was the opposite, where my parents were trying to become more like Jesus. And so that kind of shaped what it meant to be Christian. So I was very blessed, I think, because I think there are a lot of Christian families where it means that we make you go to church and you have to go to youth group and you better not swear while you're there, which is a start, but there's so much more to it.
So Jenn, one of the things I've always appreciated about you is I'm drawn to people in my life who obviously think for themselves and who aren't afraid to express their opinions, but do so in a really, graceful, eloquent way. So one of the reasons I'm drawn to you is you think outside the box. Okay, so for my friends who maybe don't know much about Christianity or they hear about growing up in a Christian home, where we drink the Kool-Aid and we have to march in lockstep and dress alike and we make our own clothing, that kind of stuff. I want to tell me about your experience. What was it about your experience where you came through it and out of it with the ability to think critically? Like, I think it's a great gift.
Well, I have to give credit to my parents, of course, for not squelching what I think is an innate personality trait. And let me clarify what I mean. Okay. Like all personality traits, there's a spectrum, and our greatest strengths are also at the shadow side. They're also our greatest weaknesses. So I think that I have just a natural bent toward thinking critically and thinking. I've always been very independent. And I think that I've always just kind of had a tendency to question why certain things are taught, or not just in the church, but just in general. Like I was a great student in school because I was a firstborn and I felt driven to get good grades, but I always kind of felt like it was playing a game. Because I was always kind of like, but why do we have to learn it? Why do we have to line up in this line to go to the bathroom? Why do we have to, like, what is the point of this? Right. So that's good. I think the shadow side of it, of course, is that, one can become a critical person, which I've also had to wrestle with, and just in terms of my own character. And so anyway, that's kind of maybe a little bit off base, but so I think part of it is just who I am. But then I think having parents that weren't threatened by that and I don't mean that like I was always asking apologetics questions, but when I was like, well, why do we give to the church, or why is it important that we, why is dad an elder, whatever it is, there was always a solid reason, and it was just kind of offered matter-of-factly, and then I was allowed to just kind of think through that. So I think it's a combination of just maybe how my brain works, but then having parents who supported that.
Okay, so one of the things I want to talk to you about later on is about you as a parent. But let's spend a little more time because I think what you just shared is really important, because I love having conversations with people from different backgrounds and people and some of my friends who aren't Christians. I think there's sometimes with my friends in conversations, it comes up that there's kind of like this groupthink when it comes to Christianity. And like you, Jenn, my mom and dad challenged us to think for ourselves and encouraged us to think for ourselves. And my dad was really big on, he was a Bible college professor and a minister and an elder in the church and a well-known person in our movement. And he said, you need to own your faith. Right. So what are some things that happened in your life, whether it be from your parents, that helped you to really own your faith? And by the way, I want you to talk a little bit more about, like, so how do you merge, I'm not thinking of the right words, but how do you merge what you know about God to be true with your like you said, the way you were designed by God to kind of see things and say, but why? Like, so God's good with that, right? Like,
Yeah. He has been so far.
Maybe not after this conversation. It's over.
Yeah, no. I think, well, and this is kind of stepping out of like the parents discussion, which we can get back to, or like my family of origin discussion, which is also really helpful. But I think one of the things that was helpful for me was going through a season of seeing a therapist in my 20s, because I did have to grapple with, even at its best. And I think I had, I don't have a story of spiritual abuse or anything like a lot of people have. Like I have overall a really positive experience growing up in the church and being shaped by that. But even at its best, there tend to be some pat answers given in the evangelical church. And so I, like a good Christian girl, even though I was thinking for myself, you're kind of taught these things. Like you're Proverbs 3 is drilled into, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean on him and not on your own understanding, and he'll direct your steps. Psalms 37:4, delight yourself in the Lord, he'll give you the desires of your heart. Like I had these, like, obviously, like I had them whipped into me, right? And so then I hit my mid-20s and like my romantic relationships weren't working out and I didn't really know what to do with my career and I didn't feel like I was getting any guidance. I was praying about it. I wasn't hearing anything. And so I'm like, well, I didn't make up these scriptures. I didn't make up these promises. So either they're not true or I'm reading them wrong. And so I had to do some work to kind of realize that, God wasn't that ATM machine where I just go and say, well, okay, so I did all the things. So therefore, and I prayed these prayers and I skipped lunch a couple days. So that's fasting. And I used that time to pray. So therefore, now you're going to tell me what to do with the rest of my life and who to marry. Like it doesn't work out that way. And as I say it, we're both smiling because like, obviously that doesn't work that way. But I think it's easy to grow up in the evangelical church and get an idea that God works that way because well-meaning people have taught us for so long those scriptures and a variety of others that do talk about those things, but I think sometimes we miss the greater picture or the bigger nuance to those passages, which is it's about a whole orientation of our life toward following God and becoming the person he's created us to be. It's not about doing certain things and getting certain rewards. And so that may or may not answer your original question, but that's where my mind goes when I think about kind of how I've made peace with that as a believer, is realizing that God is not answerable to me and I don't get to control him, which really sucks because I have good ideas, but that's not how it's set up. And once I kind of realized that, it's still something I beat my head against every now and again because I'm just like, come on, like I got it figured out. But it doesn't seem to be the way God chooses to operate. So I'm still learning that at age 44, still learning it.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, Jen, like you and I grew up in the same tribe and I had my family was amazing. My parents did such a great job. And I grew up loving the church and wanting to serve the church. But even so, my impression of our tradition is we had more answers. Like we had answers for everything. And I love the fact that my parents taught me early on to ask questions. God was big enough. Something I heard in my home was God's big enough to handle your questions. So what did you learn as you were growing up and on your unique journey? What are some specific things you learned in the periods of questioning? Mm. By the way, I asked you a question that wasn't on the list that I was going to ask you. So I'll talk a little bit to let you process it.
If I sit here for 21 seconds, like Trudeau at that Canadian press conference yesterday, trying to figure out how not to say something terrible, you can delete it out later.
Yeah, I can play nice music while you're thinking too.
I've really become more comfortable with unanswered questions and mystery. I think about your friend and my idol, Andrew Peterson, who wrote that song about the silence of God.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to equate myself with the suffering saints of the church in sharing that. But I mean, I think all of us have seasons like that, right? Where we're earnestly, sincerely seeking. And I mean, I remember saying to God, even in college, like, God, I don't know what to major in. I don't know what to do with my life. If you'll tell me, I'll do it. And then it was just kind of this realization later on that once again, God doesn't usually operate that way. There may be some people who have those experiences, and I don't want to discredit people who feel like they've heard from God in that way. Mm-hmm. But I think for the vast majority of us, he loves us too much as a father to be a dictator. And I think a lot of times we want a dictator because it's easier. And we want to be parented like we're preschoolers, not like we're young adults. And so, we'll talk more about my experience with step parenting, but, I have young adults now. It's a whole new ballgame, because they really don't always care what I have to say. And until they're really desperate, and then they'll hang on every word. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I think God wants us to grow up in the faith. Scripture teaches us that. He wants us to be growing. And so that means he's going to parent us differently than he would when we're brand new baby Christians. So I'm okay with maybe not getting the answer at all, or maybe getting it a lot later than I expected. I'm okay. I'm more okay with mystery. Mystery's like wonderful and also frustrating, because like, if I can figure everything about God out, then I'm not interested. Like, that's not a God who's worth my time. But at the same time, I want to have it all figured out. So just living, I think, in that tension has been helpful. And I think it's helped shape me as a person, because I am such a type A, person, that it's really helpful to have a God who's just like, nope, sorry. You're going to have to wait 3.5 years for that one. And then it's not going to look like what you thought. And okay.
So let me ask you that, but real quick here, as I turn off my phone that I forgot to turn off. I'm very professional here.
I know. I've been turning off my email notifications this whole time.
Okay. By the way, I want people I want to encourage people to maybe stop and rewind what you said about mystery, because there were some really profound things in there. But I have to say this too, because I'm very shallow. My podcast has become like the 7 degree, what's that thing with Kevin Bacon, like the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon? Because
yeah.
I interviewed Ron Block a few weeks ago, and I met Ron Block through Andrew Peterson. And then I interviewed Andrew Peterson, and I met Andrew Peterson through Andrew Peterson when I met him at college, and his wife was in my youth group, and I did their wedding. And then I interviewed, the podcast before this was Justin Miller. This just dawned on me. And Justin Miller, Andrew met Gabe Scott at a lock-in at Justin Miller's church when Justin Miller was a youth minister. And that was the first band Andrew had. Gabe Scott was in it, and his wife, Jamie. And now I'm talking to you, and you and I have had an appreciation for Andrew. And I know did you go sing on one of his choir things when you were in Nashville, or did you never make it? Okay.
No, it was after I left Nashville. No, I have no official connection to him, just idol worship and so much appreciation for what he brings. Yeah. I got to know his music when I was in Nashville, and like to consider myself kind of one of the earlier fans, one of the earlier adopters, but have just been so blessed by what he brings. So yeah, maybe you just can only invite people to your podcast who know or know of Andrew. Because
that's right. So what is it? So on your journey, what is it about the idea of mystery that's like so resonates with you? Is it because you had in your journey, you explain a little more to me about that, because I thought what you said was really insightful. But like when it comes to mystery, can you lean into that just a little bit more? Like, why do themes in books and music about mystery resonate with you so?
Well, I think maybe it goes back to that that innate sense that everything is okay to be questioned. And so I think there's kind of a dissatisfaction with a religious tradition that thinks that they've got it all figured out. And so as much as I may personally have a personality trait that wants to have everything, lined up, I think I realized the inadequacy of that, both just for personally, like I think as I mature, I'm learning the inadequacy of that. But I think when I look at a faith system, I realize that anything that can be that neatly categorized and explained is not probably worth my time. I'm not interested in God because he acts like an accountant, right? I'm interested because of Aslan. I'm interested in, like, you never know when he's going to show up or what he's going to say. You just know it's going to be good, and you don't get to dictate it, and you don't get to. You mostly should just sit there and be quiet. But it's like capital G good. And I'm okay with that, because I think that's better than a system that's like, I know everything that's coming, and I know everything that, I can predict everything. And it's scarier. I mean, I think if you really want to be a Christian, it's pretty scary. And I think that's maybe why we've tamed it down so much or tried to put it in boxes, is because, and I'm not saying I live this way nearly the way that Jesus calls us to, but like, I would have been one of the people listening to Jesus when he was preaching on earth, and I would have been like, I don't know about that. Like, come on, right? I would not have been one of the people who was like jumping out of the water with him and all of that. And I have a lot of grace for all those people in the story who heard the hard
Mhm.
teachings and walked away, because it is super hard. And he doesn't seem real interested in making it easier, which is another conversation, I've had through the years. So I guess I'm just not interested in anything that is, unless it's my checking account or like my tax return, I'm just not interested in anything that's super black and white anymore.
Okay, I hope people I hope God brings people to this podcast who have the same kind of question, the ability to think for themselves, but also who may be wrestling with, can God handle my questions? Because Jen, like what you just said, like it's so interesting, because from one perspective, it's like the world's perspective, it's counterintuitive. I'm a woman who questions. I was born this way. I was encouraged to question. I was encouraged to think for myself. But if I'm hearing you correctly, one of the things you love most about God is that every question is not answered. Like there's mystery there, which seems like you're hungry, but you're not being fed, but it's completely satisfying because of who God is and what he teaches you through the silence, what he teaches you through the mystery. Because that's the thing, Jen, like that's the thing I've always appreciated about you, is I've never thought about it that way. Yeah, I find the same thing. Like, lost my dad at an early age. God, why? I'm fine. Like in the mystery, in the silence, I've learned things I could have learned no other way. And it's counterintuitive, right? What you're saying is counterintuitive. Like, but I love that. I just love that that's a part of your journey.
Yeah. Yeah, it is counterintuitive. And I think, and you can choose whether or not you want to include this next part or not, but it means that I pray a lot less. And probably some of that is still a holdover from those years where I was questioning more from an angry posture. And some of it's probably still stuff that I need to work through. So I'm not saying this is like all from a maturity perspective.
Yeah.
But I think I also kind of reached that point where, I don't know, you've read Jayber Crow by Wendell Berry? If you haven't, it's worth the read. But there's a passage, and I'm going to massacre it, but there's a passage where he basically says, if you pray to God, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, then there's nothing else to pray. Like that is the prayer. And once you've prayed that, there's not a whole lot to add to it. Not that God doesn't want to hear, we've all been taught since we were infants, God wants to hear every thought. Jesus is your best friend. But like, if you're really praying, like, your will be done in this situation, bring your kingdom to my life in your kingdom way in this situation, then it's kind of like, okay, let's see how that goes, right? But there's not a lot of other stuff. So I don't ask for stuff very much. One, because I spent a lot of years asking and not getting it, or at least not feeling like I got what I wanted. But also I just kind of see like it's not really about that. I had a friend, I don't know if you know Peter McGowan. Yeah, he one time I was telling him about kind of this journey. This was like 20 years ago, and I was telling him I didn't really pray for stuff anymore, right? And because I said I've got so many prayers where I've asked for stuff, and I not only maybe don't get it, or maybe the opposite happens. So it's almost like, like I know what's gonna happen if I pray this prayer, right? And he said, well, what do you have that you never thought to ask for? And I thought, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So many blessings, so many hard things that turned into good things that I never asked for. And so I obviously have no idea what I need. So, I just don't, I'll throw one up now and then where I really feel like I could use some help. And in the step parenting journey that we'll talk about, there was a lot more praying. But I just don't, I feel guilty sometimes because I don't do the whole like daily quiet time thing, but I just find that for me, that's not super helpful. So now everybody's tuned out because I'm a total heretic, but
no, I think that's the thing.
Where I am.
This is why I wanted to talk to you, because you're very interesting, because I know you love the Lord. Your journey is your journey, and it's taught you you have as we all should, a unique relationship with the Lord and a unique understanding. And I think that's the thing, is I know there's got to be people listening to this who resonate with what you're saying, and that the image you use of God not being an ATM, and not always going to God asking for stuff, because on your specific journey you asked God for things that didn't happen. So it's so interesting to see you sitting in your faith as you are in light of your journey. Why, like, so what why haven't you become this? Why didn't you become a bitter person who shakes their fist at God and like, where are you? Why haven't you?
Right. Well, I think I went through that phase, definitely, which is one of the
How'd
reasons
you get
why.
through it? Like, that's the thing is, it feels like, I wonder, it feels like some people get stuck there or get derailed there. How'd you not?
Well, I think honestly, I may still have days where I'm stuck there.
Okay.
Honestly.
Yeah.
But I think part of it was working with a good therapist. I think part of it was just getting a little bit older. I mean, we're all getting older and kind of getting a little bit more perspective and seeing you can't always see the threads weaving through your life until later when you look back at kind of how they have been woven together. That's such a cliche, but I mean, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
It's a cliche because it's true.
Yeah.
And so some of it I think is perspective. Yeah, I don't know.
Was it friends? Was it mentors? Was it things you personally experienced? They're like, okay, like I'm good. Like,
long pause while I think.
That's good.
So the question is, why am I not bitter and cynical? Is that the question?
Yeah. That's the street. Yeah,
my husband would be like, "You're the most cynical person I know." I think because the story hangs together. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm kind of like the apostle who was like, "Where else are we going to go? Where else are we going to find the words of life?" So just because I don't have it all figured out, or it's not, I can't work it always the way that I could some other system or plan, the story hangs together from the very first words that God spoke to the very last words in Revelation. You talk about a thread running through. I mean, it hangs together, and I can't find that anywhere else. And so I'm willing to give God the benefit of the doubt that he knows what he's doing, because if he can do all of that, and if he is doing all of that, and in the midst of all the junk, you and I both have seen so many things over the years that show God showing up in his people and who they are, or God showing up in his church, as messy as it is. And so where else am I going to go? Like,
Yep.
It may not be exactly how I would want to script it, but it's the best thing going, if I think so.
I realize why I respect you so much. It's what you talk about is, first of all, I hope people go back and rewind and listen to what you said about God being an ATM and the mystery thing. And then what you just said about the story fits together, or however you said more brilliantly than that. But one of the things, Jen, like, for example, as you're talking, I realized, my dad and mom taught me to think. And so after my first year of Bible college, I left Bible college and went to Wyoming. And I in all intents and purposes, I walked away from my faith for that summer. And I made horrible choices and did all kinds of things. And I had no rules or anything like that out there as a 19-year-old young person living with 400 other college students in the middle of Wyoming, Yellowstone National Park. Anyway, long story short, that's the summer I got a call that my dad died. Mm. And I was telling somebody yesterday that when I got that call from one of the elders in our church saying my dad had died the day before and they've been trying to find me, instead of driving me away from God, when I share my testimony now, Jen, I'd say that's when I was saved. Like, I'd been baptized a long time ago, but I was saved that moment when it mattered. That moment when there was a crossroads and I had a choice to make. That moment when it wasn't a flannel graph version of Christianity or a cliche. So what you're saying is so interesting, because that's that I share that experience, that what should have broken my heart or in allegiance to the Lord solidified it. And I've not looked back since then. So, okay. So I just love how you make me think. Let me ask you a question. I'll ask you what you're doing now, but then I want to ask you a question about how you got there. Okay. So tell me what you're doing now. Because I know we're going to talk about you're a step parent, but tell us what else you're doing right now.
Yeah. So I had my own freelance writing and editing business for a little over a decade. And then in 2018, I started working as the Chief Communications Officer at Johnson University. Johnson is a small private Christian university in Knoxville, Tennessee. We also have a campus in Kissimmee, Florida, which under a different name is your alma mater.
Florida Christian College, God rest her soul.
Yeah, now Johnson U, Florida. Yeah, Johnson U, Florida. I lead a small team to do everything from print design to website to video, just trying to manage the external communication efforts for the university. And I've been there about 2.5 years, and it's a lot of fun. I work with some really high quality people, and that's what the day-to-day of it sometimes can be exhausting, because like every other institution of higher ed right now, we're scrambling to deal with the effects of the virus. We're scrambling to deal with the public perception changing about the need for higher education, which I think is a fair question. And then just, lack of funding, trying to keep all those things in balance. And so it's a challenging job, and it can be very stressful. But I work with some really amazing people, and that makes it more fun.
Yeah. They are amazing people. So you're some of the best of the best. So when you were 18, are you doing what you thought you'd be doing?
Well, okay. So here's probably the biggest, to just kind of go back to our previous discussion for a minute. I would say the biggest struggle of my life so far, and as I say that sounds so melodramatic, but the constant struggle has been, I've always felt, since I was in college, since I was praying that prayer about, God, tell me what to do, I've always felt like I had a lot of potential. I know I have a good work ethic. I've always felt like I had a lot to offer, and I've never known what the heck I want to do when I grow up. And I never have. And I've never had people, I think the greatest disappointment of my life, maybe so far, there's still 40 years left to go, but so far it's been that I don't have anything I'm super, super passionate about. And that doesn't mean I don't care about my job, or that I'm not really excited about the university I work for, because I wouldn't be there if I didn't think it was worthwhile. Mm-hmm. But it's not like I'm passionate about higher education. I'm not, I would say the one thing that I really, really love is writing. And that's why I did that for so many years. And it just, for a variety of reasons, it just was time to end that season and go on to something else. And I still get to do that some in this job. But no, to answer your question, it's not like I was like, someday I'm gonna proofread stuff for 8 hours a day and sit in meetings for 8 more. Like, that was not my dream. But I don't know, this is another thing I struggle with. Like, how many people are really, it's such a buzzword in Christian circles to talk about what you're passionate about. Like, really, like at some point you just have to get some work done. So that's probably a whole other tangent, but
no.
Like, nobody's passionate about cleaning motel rooms at the day's end, but it's honorable work that somebody needs to do. So at what point do we just decide that we're going to choose to do our work with excellence and be okay with that? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So finding peace, like this, as I'm thinking, like, this podcast has been so much about finding peace in
true.
When things aren't necessarily going the way you thought they would, or even, for example, I mean, let's go to the opposite extreme. I mean, Jonah never had peace about being in Nineveh, yet he was called to do that. Now, that's not anywhere close to what you're doing, but it did resonate a little bit, because I'm a big guy, for pushing passion and making sure, like, do something where you feel God's favor. Mm-hmm. But what you're saying is, I hear a contentment, but not to the point of, not moving forward. Like, I don't hear you like, oh, I'm just resolved. This is my life, and it is what it is. Because you're not saying that. You're not saying what you enjoy what you're doing. It's meaningful, as you said. It's purposeful, and it's making a difference.
I think just one of those things that I push back on, or one of the boxes that I question, is just this whole, and it strikes me as an evangelical thing, but maybe it's bigger than that, because you've got people like Oprah and Marcus Buckingham and others who talk about it too. But just pushing back a little on this idea that everybody has a passion, or that everybody has some sort of, I've always resented that Buechner quote about, the place that God's calling you is where the world's great hunger and your great passion meet. I'm paraphrasing, but that quote. And I remember I wrote a blog post years ago about, well, what if you don't have any great passion? Like, because I just don't. But to your point, that doesn't mean that I'm not enjoying my life or that I'm not enjoying my work. It just means that I don't have this thing where it's like, if I don't get to do this thing, or, you know, and I envy people who have that. I envy people who know God has called me or gifted me or equipped me to be this, or to do this, or to reach this people group, or to send this message. That's awesome. I think I'm just more of, my passion is to try to enjoy what I'm doing, and hopefully, you know, have it use things that I'm good at. I mean, writing has been a consistent thread throughout my career. But yeah, I don't have any great thing where I'm like, I think if I had some huge thing that was really my dream, I think I would like to think I would have the guts to go after it, but I just haven't found it yet.
So the person who's listening who says, because I know you and you are so comfortable in your own skin, and you're humble, but you're really gifted, but you're really comfortable in your own skin. And as a stepmom, as a religious leader, as a communicator. So what do you say to the person who's listening to this and they're like, how, how do I find peace? Like, so what are some can you think of any like practical things you do on a regular basis to find peace and contentment in what God's called you to do right now? Because, by the way, we're going to get into this. Some of what you've been called to do has been incredibly difficult from interpersonal perspective. Like, you know, your roles as stepmom. So what are some practical things you do, you know, on a regular basis, Jenn, to pull peace out of your situation and find pleasure in it?
Well, for years, I always kind of made fun of those people who had a word of the year. It probably doesn't shock you that I like rolled my eyes at that. And then I became one of those people. And I don't know that it's so much for a year as it is for just like a time span, because I'm a slow learner and sometimes a year's not long enough. But the words that have been resonating with me over the past, I'd say 18 months, are the word now and the word enjoy. I get pulled in so many different ways from my job. I mean, it's been so great just to be on this podcast, because I have my phone over there. I can't hear the messages. I have my instant messages turned off. I'm not checking social media right now. There's just so many channels that are demanding my attention, plus my to-do list. And it's very easy to, whatever comes after multitasking, where you've just lost all semblance of sanity, it's really easy to go to that place. And so I've really had to discipline myself to just repeat, like, now, be right here now, do this thing now, then do the next thing. Do not open that tab. Do not check that comment. Do not answer that call. Be here now. And part of that is just classic productivity training, like, you know, of how to be more effective. But it's really not even about getting through my to-do list faster. It's about getting through it with more joy. And then the word enjoy, like, I decided that for 2020, which is crazy ironic, but for 2020, my thought was going to be, how can I enjoy? What can I find to enjoy right now? And I don't mean like self-care, you know, how can I but like right now, I get to enjoy the fact that it's a sunny day. I get to enjoy that I'm talking with this wonderful friend. I get to enjoy the fact that I'm not checking my email. Like, there's always something to feel good about when you're in the now. And so that sounds like a super corny Women's Daytime answer, but that's really how, I mean, because again, that therapist that I went to back 20 years ago, I live in the past and the future. I'm either worrying about something or I'm regretting something. These are my greatest gifts. So we talked about that, and she was like, well, really all you have is right now. She's like, you could keel over like in 30 seconds and you can't go back to yesterday. And again, I know I sound so cliche, but I mean, these things are cliches because they're true. And if you can really get your head around them, they can really be helpful. So anyway, she was like talking to me about this. And so I just looked at her and I was like, all I have is right now. And she's like, this is it. She's like, it doesn't mean you don't plan. It doesn't mean you're not responsible. It doesn't mean that you don't apologize for mistakes. But in terms of actually living your life, you get right now. And that has always stuck with me. And I'm just like, well, if now is pretty good, and then now is pretty good, and then now is pretty good, you put enough of those together, that's a good hour. That's a good day. That's good life. So that's what I'm trying to work on.
Okay. This is why I wanted to talk to you. Your perspective, your faith is just so real, salt of the earth, nitty gritty, really practical. Because what you just shared is an incredibly practical way. It's not cliche at all. It's what you said, because it's true. It is. But what you just shared is an incredible practical way where people can find pleasure in the moment and find joy in the moment. You know, Jesus, each day has enough trouble of its own. You know, don't borrow trouble. And what you say resonates with me because it's so stinking practical. And that's the thing I like about you, Jenn, is you're just, yet you tell it like it is, you call it like you see it. And you're not running for office. I've never seen you as somebody who's like putting your finger in the air, trying to see which way is the wind blowing so you can get more votes. No, like one of the things I appreciate about you is you're practical. You call it like you see it. You are black and white. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, because this is really one of the big things I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, so talk about your journey. Your husband is a man named Matt, an incredible guy. Yeah, talk a little bit about your journey that brought you to where you are today as you know, being a step parent. We keep talking about that, and I want to make sure people understand as they're listening. I have not heard anything that I find helpful when it comes to the church's response to step parenting. And as a pastor, it's one of those things. I do marriage coaching, Jenn, and it's one of those things when it comes up, I stumble through it. It's a world I'm not familiar with. So I want you to help, because I feel like there's pastors, men and women who are listening to this, and business leaders. And I think it's one of those things, step parenting is everywhere. And I just think we don't know what to do with it. And I don't think the church is doing very well with it. So, okay. So tell me a little about your journey. And I want you to kind of bring us to where you are now as a step parent and what God's teaching you through that. Okay.
So you and I started blogging in whatever year that was, 2009, 2010, whatever. We started our blogs at the same time. And at the time we were blogging for the magazine, Christian Standard, because we were contributing editors, and we were, I think, the two youngest on the team. So they're like, let's make them blog. Plus Jenn's a girl. So yay. But it was a great example of something.
By the way, one second. How much of your ministry journey has been, well, Jenn's a girl, she can do it. Like almost, have you been?
Oh,
have you
80%.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. And I say that I'm smiling, but I don't say that with snark or with disrespect.
No.
People, our tradition, our tribe is just not known for that. And so I think their efforts to try to include more women in different leadership roles, it's kind of like, there was like, for a while, it's gotten a lot better. But I'd say like 15 years ago, there were like 6 of us. And it was like, well, which one of the 6 of us, you know, like, and we would joke among ourselves, like, I can't preach at that. Do you want to preach at it? Because they want a girl to do it. So anyway.
Okay, go ahead. I just think that's an interesting part of your journey. And by the way, once again, you're comfortable in your own skin. You're not walking around with a bunch of bitterness and an axe to grind. You're just kind of like, yeah, it is what it is. God, you know, I'll do what God calls me to do. Okay, so go. Sorry.
There are some truly amazing guys in our movement who I just love and respect so much. And they have shown me so much kindness and have mentored me. And so it could be a lot better. And I hope for the coming generations, it's a lot better. But anyway, so we were blogging, and my husband, Matt, who was not my husband at the time, this was even earlier, I think. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he at the time was married to his first wife. He was a pastor, and he was reading both of our blogs because he subscribed to that magazine. And when they added it as a feature on the website, he began following our stuff. And he read it, I think, for a couple of years. Well, his marriage ended. His wife decided she didn't want to be married anymore. And so he went through several years of, you know, grieving from that and processing that and being single dad. He had custody of his kids, primary custody. And so, but that whole time he was reading our blogs. And the way that he tells the story is, at one point he thought, you know, I'm a divorced pastor of a small church in the Northeast. Like who's going to marry me? Like who wants to sign up for that, right? But if I was going to try to meet somebody, I would want it to be like Jenn Taylor, which was my maiden name, because he was reading my blog. And so he's getting to know me and decided that he wanted to try to get to know me personally. So he reached out and we started emailing, and then we started talking on the phone. And that was in 2010, I guess, which is why it must have been earlier that we blogged. But anyway, so long story short, we got to know each other long distance, because I was in Nashville and he was in Philadelphia. And he had a fifth grader and a sixth grader, I think, at the time. And we got married in 2012 when they were 12 and 13, which is the optimum time to step in as a step parent, is during middle school. I mean, if you're going to pick your moment, that's the moment to do it.
Wow.
But it was awesome. All three of them proposed to me. It was definitely an invitation to be part of their family. And so he continued on as a pastor at that church. And so I got to do something I never wanted to do, which was be a pastor's wife for 7 years.
You didn't dream of being a pastor's wife.
That was definitely not in the 18-year-olds.
You weren't in your garden, you were 16 singing, "Dear Lord, make me a pastor's wife. He's out there somewhere. I can't wait to find him."
No, this was not part of the Jenn master plan. So I left Nashville, which was hard. I love Nashville. Although I did get out of it before it got crazy. So I still have happy memories instead of angry memories of the traffic. But moved to Philly, and just overnight, my world just changed, because I was 36. I hadn't been married before. So I went from single, do pretty much what I want, to pastor's wife, stepmom of middle schoolers. And then, of course, just the culture change between, I'd lived in California and Nashville, and now suddenly I'm up in the Northeast, where those cliches about that part of the country, those are true for a reason too. So some wonderful people, some dear friends, but like, it's just a different culture. So that's, yeah. So now Miles is the oldest. He's 21, and he'll be a senior at Johnson this fall. And Nina is 20, and she's going to be a sophomore at Keystone, which is up in Pennsylvania, this fall. And she's with her mom right now. We haven't seen her since Christmas, because whenever all the schools shut down, she was only an hour and a half from her mom. So she went there. And of course, Miles was 10 minutes from us, so he came here. So that's been a difficult thing, just to be separated, because we had pretty much, I'd say, close to 100% custody the last several years that they were being raised. And so it's hard to go from that to seeing Nina, on FaceTime once a week. So.
Hey, so you talked about them all proposing to you, and I know enough about your husband to know he's got a lot of wisdom. What are some things that Matt did right to integrate you into the family?
Yeah, he did so much. And I would say he also was very intentional about integrating me into the church family. Okay. And preparing them for, not like preparing them like I was they were very excited for him and happy. They were very kind to me, but just kind of managing expectations. Like, she's not going to come in and be the VBS leader. She's not going to, she's going to serve where she's called to serve, blah, blah, blah. But with the kids, it was very intentional to go slowly. I think sometimes when single parents start dating, they forget that it's not all about them. And so they kind of rush things, and they push their kids to adopt these new adults into their lives much more quickly than is healthy for either party. And so I met the kids probably sooner than we would have. Like, if I'd been local and we had just been meeting for coffee or whatever, I wouldn't have been in the equation for quite a while. But because our first visit was me traveling from out of town and staying with some friends of his and doing the whole, like, "Hi, I'm Jenn. We've been talking on the phone for 3 months." Like, you can't pretend, you don't want to lie to the kids about why I'm there, right? So we had to have that happen. But it was like, it was like for an hour, and we got to know each other, and it was fun. And then I went home. And then they wanted to text me and call me. And he was like, you can email her and she will email you back. And it wasn't because of any concern about me or about them, but just kind of trying to take things at small incremental steps, instead of what I see sometimes, not always, but I see some parents, they turn into teenagers again when they start dating, and they just want to spend every spare minute with this person, and they drag their kids along too. And they forget, hey, my first responsibility is to these kids, to be a parent to them. And also, this is a huge adjustment for them. And I think because Matt made choices like that, like all three kids went to pick out the ring, or all three of them, the two kids went to pick out the ring. It was a joint proposal of, like, I mean, he said the words, "Will you marry me?" But it was like, they were there. It was planned. Yeah. So I think they were on board. And I think the fact that, I think that's just healthy, because then when things grow, if things grow, everybody's ready for it emotionally instead of feeling kind of pulled into it. So
what do we do to prepare churches to better handle the emotional challenges of being a step parent? Because I know enough of your story to know that you and Matt fiercely love those kids and have fiercely fought for those kids, and we don't have to get into all that, but I just want people to understand you're a woman of grace, and you've gone through some really difficult times. So
yeah.
what can churches do? Like, what did your church do to minister to you well, or what can churches do to come alongside step parents to give them the spiritual, emotional support they need?
Yeah, well, I think one thing is realizing that everybody's story is different. There are the stories of, we had a couple in our church in Philly who the mom had left when the boy was an infant, and dad had raised him all these years, and then he remarried. Well, actually, he remarried when I think the boy was still a toddler. And so he grew up with this woman kind of as his mother figure and had that relationship with her. And that was very healthy. It was very positive, and that worked for their family. And then she and the dad had a couple of their own kids later, and they considered themselves siblings. You have other situations where, maybe like ours, where the marriage happens when the kids are older, and they already, they have a mom, they have a relationship with mom. They may spend part of the week or the month with mom. And so I think just realizing that all those narratives are different. And so there's some challenges that are universal and some best practices, but I think showing sensitivity to that, just like you would, I think, in ministering to single people, their stories are different too. Some of them have never married, some of them have been widowed, some of them are divorced and chose not to remarry. And so just not assuming that you know everything about a person's story just because they're a blended family. I think the other thing churches can do is, like, we do have, and it would take a whole other podcast and probably a bottle of whiskey to get into that whole narrative of our particular story that
this
we
is a dry podcast, Jen. I want you to
That's why I'm not going to tell that part of our story. It was hard. But so, I mean, we had a difficult situation, but I think realizing, to get back to what the church can do to be helpful, is to not take sides.
Okay.
So just because maybe the mom and her kids come to your church, that doesn't mean that they're the only good people in this equation. You don't know anything about dad, or you only know what she's told you, which I guarantee you is not 100% true. Because she's hurting and she's mad and whatever. So, I think that guy, let's give that guy the benefit of the doubt that he wants to be a great dad, and he wants to be involved in his kids' lives, and he cares about who they're becoming as people. So if he wants to show up for the Christmas play or the VBS closing program or the whatever it is, right? I mean, I'm not talking about situations where I'm not talking about anybody being unsafe, but I'm just talking about your general run of the mill. You've got a split family and both parents are showing up. Show him grace. Don't assume that he's just messed up because he's the one who doesn't have custody, or because he's the guy. I think it's not your job to take sides. It's not your job to decide who was right to leave who, or who, even if you think you know all the facts of the story, just be glad that he's at church trying to be present for his kids, or that she's at church trying to be present for her kids. It's easier said than done, because we love Marcia and her 2 children, and we've heard that Bob is like a demon straight from hell, but he's probably not, and if he is, he's probably not going to show up at church. So I think just showing a little bit of grace and understanding that these are, at their best, they're difficult situations, and at their worst, they're really awful, toxic ones. And it's not your job as the pastor. Again, the church needs to have all the safeguards in place. Like, I'm not saying we put people in situations that are not safe, but like, I also don't think it's the church's job to arbitrate and decide that because those kids, here's the thing. Okay. Those kids are 50% him or her. Yeah. The one who's the bad guy or the bad woman, they're 50% them. And they carry that with them. And they identify with that parent, and they have an unreasonable biological love for that parent, regardless of what that parent has done, which drives me crazy, because I'm like, Hello, can you even see this? But it's their mommy, it's their daddy. So you can't attack the parent without attacking the kid. And
Wow.
savvy step parents get that sooner rather than later. And I think the church needs to as well. It does, again, it doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries, you don't have pickup procedures, you don't have any of those things, but let the dad come to the Christmas program and give him a handshake and show him where the coffee is. He's just trying to be there for his kids, right? Long
Mhm.
speech. You're going to edit that down. But
That was great. So, you lived in Nashville. I'm from the South, and there's a phrase called, we say, "Bless your heart." All right. What was some of the parenting advice you got early on from people, and you wanted to say, "Oh, bless your heart"? You have no idea what you're talking about.
right. Well, I don't listen to parenting advice unless it's from a step parent. No
Oh,
offense to
that's
all
so rich.
no offense to all the parents out there, but I'm not telling them what to do because I'm not a parent. I'm not going to tell you how to parent your kid because I have no idea. If you want to talk to me about how to step parent your kid, I can talk to you about that. It is a totally different ballgame. So I hear well-meaning people say, well, sometimes they will refer to me as mom. Like they would say to Miles, like, oh, your mom is so whatever. I appreciated meeting your mom. And so I had a conversation with the kids early on. And I said, and like sometimes, we'd be out and somebody would say, oh, Nina, you look so much like your mom, meeting me, which is hysterical because she looks exactly like her actual mom and nothing like me. But I just had conversations with them early on. And I said, if we're in a situation where it's like an acquaintance or a stranger and they're just trying to be kind, I'm not going to correct them and make them feel bad. You and I both know that I'm not trying to take that place, but we're not going to make other people feel bad. But if it's somebody who's in our life who uses that language, then I'm going to correct them because you and I both know I'm not your mom. And they understood what I meant by that. If some well-meaning person at the NACC says, oh, your son is such a good guy, I'll be like, we love Miles. Thank you so much. Right. But like, if like somebody who's like, should know better calls him my kid, I'm going to be like, well, he's my stepson. And I'm so proud that I get to be a stepmom, because it's subtle, but it's like, I'm not going to dishonor that experience. I'm not taking that place. I can't take that place. So anyway, that's kind of one thing. I think another thing was people said, well, you just love them like they're your own. And I'm like, well, do you though? Because like when a mother gives birth, she's flooded by oxytocin, that love bonding hormone. Believe me when I say that you are not flooded with oxytocin when you walk into the house and smell their gym shoes when they're 13 years old. Like that is not your first immediate like, oh, bonding hormones. Like you just are like, I had a really cute house in Nashville that was clean before this, and here you are. So you can't love them like they're your own. They're not, and nobody's pretending that they are, especially when they're older. So I think you and I talked a little bit about like what this maybe has taught me about God.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if I can kind of jump to that, I think I was talking to my friend Nicole, who's an adoptive parent. She's adopted 3 children. And she talked about how the adoption journey was one of radical hospitality. Like she just had to empty herself and then reopen herself to this hospitality of welcoming somebody else's children into her life. Now it's different. Adoption is obviously different than step parenting. But I think there's some real parallels there. In terms of the posture that I take toward these people and the posture that they chose to take toward me, because they didn't have to invite me into their home or their family. And I don't, and that was their choice, to which I said yes. And so the choice that I get to make is how much am I going to show that hospitality of my heart and of my time to these children who are 50% somebody that I don't like at all. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that's who they are. And so how much am I going to love them 100% despite that? And of course I do. And then I think also it's just that reminder, and then not to Jesus juke this and make it all like, and now the end, the moral, but I mean, it really is an opportunity to demonstrate, God didn't have to have the radical hospitality to invite me into his family either. And so, I'm sure there are times where he's just thoroughly annoyed with me, but I still get to be in the family, and I still get to have the name, and I still get to have all the rights and privileges of being part of his family. And so there's just been a real, just a real sense of, I called the first 2 years selfishness detox. It was just total detox of all of my selfishness. And I still have to work on that because I'm still used to kind of just, doing what I want. But I think it was immediately like I had all this free time to, oh, okay, you guys want to eat dinner again? I just cooked dinner last night. Like,
Yeah.
So some real kind of character shaping things, which I think probably I'm still in the middle of, even though they're older and the dynamics have changed. But
all right, as you listen to this, as you listen to this podcast, you're going to hear that you said you're only going to live to your 84. So hopefully, we're wishing you many more years than that. So you're 84, and you and Matt are sitting in a church fellowship hall somewhere in the future, and you're surrounded by people who love you and care about you, and your stepchildren honor you. What's one thing, Jenn, you want your stepkids to say about you?
Oh, wow. I want them to say that I made them feel important. I don't know that I always do that as they get older because they're not as needy, right? I think it was easier to make them feel important when they couldn't drive and they couldn't, I spent a lot of time the last 7 years driving people and picking people up and making them dinner and checking homework and folding laundry and whatever it is. So how do I make them feel important to me now when, we're separated by the virus, or, even with Miles, like we see him every day and he's living upstairs and he's doing his internship this summer and stuff, but it's really easy, especially with the demands of my work, to just prioritize that. And so I would hope that in every stage, as they get older, as they become young professionals, as they become young spouses, as they become parents, I hope that they can feel like that hospitality has extended to, that they always matter, if that makes sense.
Yep. You are gifted at making people feel important. It's something I've really, when you said that, I thought that's exactly what you've done with your whole life. Like I've been with you in a gazillion different settings, and you have a gift for making people feel important. So yeah, that's cool. Hey, I always wrap up by asking, what's something that's bringing joy to your journey right now?
I think it's gardening. And I apologize if you hear my dog howling in the background. He just finished his food. So
I assumed it was Miles coming down for a bowl of cereal or something.
No, this is my dog letting me know he doesn't have enough food.
Gotcha.
Joy right now would be gardening. There's something therapeutic. I think especially when you spend all day looking at a screen, and or especially now, even meetings are looking at a screen. There's something therapeutic about digging in the dirt. So I went out last weekend, I think it was, and I got all the rest of the stuff for my garden and I planted it all. And I told Matt it was like Christmas. Like, it's one of my favorite days of the year when I get to plant my garden. And then I just watch it all summer, and I make Miles come out and look at it and tell me that he thinks it looks good and stuff. So that's just very life-giving to me. And I probably will get like 3 tomatoes out of it. But the process of being in the dirt. Speaking of chemicals, did you know there's actual, I think I read a study that you actually get dopamine in your system through soil. Like, God created dirt to actually improve our chemical, our brains. So I'll take all of that I can get.
Cool. Well, Jenn, you're life-giving to me, and I'm excited for people to listen to this conversation because I know people are going to hear it, and it's going to be life-giving to them too. So thank you so much for taking time to talk with me. All right.
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron.